Close your eyes for a moment and imagine a little girl whose smile could brighten an entire classroom. 5-year-old Hanifa Abubakar was the kind of child who made adults soften, who made other children laugh, who made the world feel a little safer. She loved school. She loved learning. And she trusted her teachers, especially one man who had been a familiar face every morning. A man she believed would always protect her. A man who should have been safe. But evil doesn't always come from the shadows. Sometimes it wears a smile. Sometimes it greets you at the gate. Sometimes it holds your hand. It was a quiet evening in Kano. Children were returning home from school, their voices filling the air. But one voice never made it back. One small step, one familiar turn, and Hanifa disappeared. Her parents searched. Neighbors searched. And the entire community held its breath. A child doesn't simply vanish, not in broad daylight, not from a school, and definitely not with adults around. But the hours dragged on, and the night grew darker. Then the phone rang. A trembling voice demanded ransom. What kind of monster would kidnap a 5-year-old? What kind of human being would hear a mother's cries and still threaten her child? The fear in the Abubakar home became suffocating. An agonizing kind that wraps around your chest and squeezes until you can no longer breathe. But the voice behind the ransom call wasn't a stranger. It was someone who knew Hanifa, someone who understood her routines, someone she trusted so deeply that she didn't hesitate when he approached her. It wasn't long before the truth began to seep through the cracks, slowly, painfully, like blood from a fresh wound. Her teacher, her own teacher, the man entrusted with her safety, Abdulmalik Tanko. Imagine the horror of that realization. The betrayal, the rage, the disbelief. The community couldn't understand it. How could a teacher, someone who should nurture children, be capable of harming one? But Tanko's confession revealed something far darker than anyone expected. Hanifa had recognized him. The moment he took her, she called him by his name. She asked why he was doing this. She trusted him, even in the middle of fear. And that trust became the reason she never came home. According to his own chilling account, he panicked. He feared she would expose him. And in that moment of pure evil, he silenced her innocence forever. But the horror didn't end with her death. No, monsters rarely stop at one act of cruelty. Tanko attempted to cover his crime with an almost unimaginable coldness. He buried her body inside a shallow grave, right in the school where she once played. A school filled with children's laughter. A place meant for growth, joy, and hope, now hiding a nightmare underneath the ground. Parents walked past that grave every day, unaware. Children played nearby, unaware. Life continued, unaware. While beneath it, the truth waited. When the authorities finally uncovered the truth, Kano erupted. Shock turned into grief. Grief turned into fury. A city cried, a nation mourned, and the story of Hanifa Abubakar became more than a crime. It became a wound on the soul of everyone who heard it. Her parents broken, her friends confused, her teachers horrified. The people who loved her were forced to confront something they never imagined, that the person responsible was the very one they had trusted. A man who smiled at parents, encouraged students, and pretended to care. But behind that mask was darkness. And now, everyone could finally see it. Tanko's arrest exposed layers of planning, attempts at deception, and a chilling lack of remorse. But even as he tried to hide the truth, one thing became painfully clear. This was not a sudden act. It was deliberate, calculated, cold. Hanifa's case sent a wave of fear across the country. If a child wasn't safe with her own teacher, then who could be trusted? Parents held their children tighter. Schools were questioned. And justice, swift, unforgiving justice, became the demand of millions. But justice has its own pace. It gathers evidence. It seeks truth. And in this case, the truth was laid out in chilling detail. Testimonies, confessions, discoveries that no one should ever have to hear. Yet at the center of it all was a little girl. A child whose dreams were cut short. A child who believed she was safe. A child whose final moments were filled with confusion and betrayal. And the story doesn't end with her burial. No. This case takes several darker turns, twists so disturbing that even investigators struggled to speak about them. Motives that don't add up, actions that seem almost inhuman, responses that reveal the mind of a man capable of extraordinary cruelty, and a community whose grief turned into something far more powerful. Because the truth is, Hanifa's case is not just the story of a crime. It is the story of trust broken, innocence stolen, and justice demanded with a force that shook an entire state. But what really happened inside that school? What did Tanko tell investigators behind closed doors? What secrets surfaced during the trial? And what final judgment did the court deliver for the man who betrayed a child? Those answers are darker than you think. The investigation into the murder of Hanifa Abubakar didn't begin with calm professionalism. It began with anger. It began with disbelief. And it began with a growing suspicion that something was very wrong at the school where she disappeared. Detectives walked through the gated compound, their faces tight, their eyes scanning everything. Every classroom, every corridor, every shadow. The teachers stood by, nervous, whispering among themselves. But one person stood out, Abdulmalik Tanko. He tried to appear stable, cooperative, confused. But his hands trembled. His eyes darted. His voice cracked at the wrong moments. Detectives know that guilt isn't always loud. Sometimes it's in the silence. Sometimes it's in the stiffness of a man who suddenly refuses to meet your gaze. And Tanko was drowning in his own silence. One investigator looked at him closely and asked a simple question. "Where were you when she disappeared?" His answer changed 3 times within minutes. Something was off. Something was hiding beneath his rehearsed sentences. Something dark was pushing against the surface. And the officers felt it. Then they followed the paper trail, the ransom calls, the numbers used, the locations pinged. Each lead pulled them closer, and the closer they got, the stranger Tanko behaved. His confidence slipped. His lies tangled. His story began to collapse in on itself. By the time detectives brought him in for serious questioning, his mask had already begun to fall apart. He sat in the interrogation room, a pale, shaking version of the man who once greeted parents with a smile. And when they pressed him harder, the crack turned into a break. Tanko confessed, not quietly, not calmly, but with the desperation of a man cornered by the truth. He admitted he kidnapped Hanifa. He admitted he demanded ransom. And then, in a chilling whisper, he admitted he killed her. But the details, the details sent waves of horror through the room. Hanifa recognized him. She trusted him. She believed he was taking her somewhere safe. And when fear kicked in, she didn't scream, she asked questions. She tried to understand. She pleaded. And Tanko responded with murder. What he described next was so morally rotten, the officers listening felt physically sick. He tried to poison her. When that failed, he used his own hands. And then, in an act of darkness that defies understanding, he transported her lifeless body back to a place she loved. Her school. Picture that moment. The dead of night, an empty compound, a shallow grave dug under the kind of silence that feels unnatural, and the cold, unfeeling hands of a man burying the child who once called him teacher. Days later, unaware parents walked past that spot. Teachers stood directly above it. Children played just a few meters away. Life went on with a grave hiding beneath their feet. When investigators uncovered the truth and led Tanko back to the school for reconstruction, something eerie happened. He walked slowly, as though the place itself was watching him. Even he seemed afraid, not of the police, not of the journalists waiting outside, but of the building, the classrooms, the memory he had buried alive. Outside, a crowd gathered. The anger in their voices echoed off the walls. They looked at him with a hatred so deep, it felt like the city itself was rejecting him. People shouted. Women cried. Men clenched their fists. The name Tanko became a word of disgust, a name no parent ever wanted to hear again. Meanwhile, the forensic team moved carefully, marking paths, collecting fibers, tracing Tanko's movements step by step. Every detail painted a clearer picture of a man driven by greed, panic, and a terrifying lack of humanity. But the true storm came in the courtroom. Tanko was led in, eyes down, shoulders slumped. The atmosphere was electric, filled with tension, grief, and a quiet rage simmering beneath every whisper. Hanifa's family sat there, broken but determined. They wanted answers. They wanted justice. And then, the confession was played. The court fell silent. No one coughed. No seat creaked. You could hear the hum of the fluorescent lights above. Tanko's own voice filled the room, explaining what he did, how he planned it, how he lied, how he killed Hanifa because she recognized him. A parent in the gallery broke into sobs. A woman fainted. Someone whispered, "Monster." Tanko looked down the entire time, unable or unwilling to meet the eyes of the people he had hurt. His accomplices, Hashim and Fatima, were also dragged into the proceedings, their involvement dissected piece by piece. But nothing compared to the horror wrapped around Tanko's confession. The courtroom became a battlefield of emotion. The prosecution's voice trembled with fury. The defense struggled to speak. The judge maintained a calm expression, but even he paused longer than usual when reviewing certain details. This was not a case. This was a nightmare. And when judgment finally came, it was swift. Tanko was sentenced to death, not because the law sought vengeance, but because society needed protection from people like him. Because the name Hanifa demanded justice. Because the world had lost a child who deserved much more than the darkness she encountered. But even after the verdict, the story did not end. There were reactions across the country: anger, relief, fear, heartbreak. Parents began questioning the safety of private schools. Educators flinched at the mention of Tanko's name. And the image of little Hanifa smiling in her school uniform became a symbol, a reminder, a warning. A child trusted an adult, and that trust killed her. Yet there is more. There are details still unanswered, motives still debated, moments still shrouded in mystery. Because behind every confession, there are shadows. Behind every verdict, a deeper question. And behind every monster, a mind we still don't fully understand. The verdict against Abdulmalik Tanko was meant to bring closure, but the shockwaves of Hanifa Abubakar's murder rippled far beyond the courtroom. What happened to her didn't just break the hearts of her parents. It unsettled an entire region. From the narrow streets of Dhaka to the busiest markets of Kano City, her name carried a weight that felt almost physical. You could hear it in the hushed conversations. You could feel it in the lingering tension. You could see it in the way parents held their children's hands a little tighter whenever they passed a school gate. Because the horror of this case exposed something far deeper than a single crime. It exposed a betrayal of trust inside a community where trust is everything. In northern Nigeria, a teacher is more than a teacher. He is an authority figure, a moral guide, a guardian the community relies on. But Abdulmalik Tanko shattered that trust in a way that felt unforgivable. After the confession, people wanted to understand what kind of mind could commit such an act. The more investigators dug into his background, the more disturbing the picture became. Tanko was struggling financially. His school was barely surviving. He owed money. He had pressures he couldn't manage. Yet instead of seeking help, he allowed greed to infect his thinking. He saw Hanifa not as a child, but as a way out of his own problems. It was a twisted logic, cruel, selfish, and deeply immoral. His confession revealed something darker, a chilling, emotional emptiness. He spoke about his actions without remorse, without hesitation, without the tremor you would expect from someone who had taken a child's life. Psychologists later described his behavior as cold, detached, almost hollow. A kind of thinking where the suffering of others simply doesn't matter. But what made the case even more disturbing was how Tanko behaved after the crime. He went to Hanifa's home. He sat with her parents. He offered sympathy. He joined the search. He pretended to be concerned. That pretense, that ability to sit with grieving parents while knowing the truth, was what terrified people most. It wasn't only the murder. It was the deception surrounding it. The way he walked among them as if nothing had happened. The way he hid behind the mask of a teacher, knowing he had taken one of their own. When investigators finally uncovered the grave inside the school compound, the community erupted. Mothers cried openly. Elderly men shook their heads in disbelief. Young people flooded the streets, shouting, demanding justice, refusing to accept what had been done to a child so young, so innocent. Hanifa's father, in his pain, spoke words that echoed across the region. He talked about trust, faith, betrayal. He talked about the unimaginable burden of losing a child not to illness, not to accident, but to a man he had once respected, a man he had paid to teach his daughter. In northern Nigerian households, children rarely own shelves of toys or piles of colorful playthings. What they do have is closeness, family routine. Hanifa's daily world was simple. School, home, meals shared together, lessons recited in the living room, stories told at night. Now, those routines were broken. Her mother found herself staring at the small items Hanifa left behind. Her school bag, her uniform, her scarf folded neatly the way she always kept it. In Hausa culture, mourning is quiet, heavy, dignified. No flowers, no displays, just prayers, memories, and the weight of loss. Her absence created a silence that felt louder than any scream. Meanwhile, the abandoned school building became a symbol of betrayal. The government shut it down almost immediately. The classrooms were locked. The play area was deserted. The walls that once heard children recite verses now stood in eerie silence. Nobody wanted to go near it. Residents walked past quickly. Some avoided the street entirely. It became a place whispered about, a place children were warned to stay away from. But while the building fell quiet, the community's voice grew louder. Calls for stricter regulation of private schools intensified. Religious and community leaders held meetings, urging parents to be vigilant. Authorities implemented new screening measures. Education boards conducted inspections across Kano. The name Hanifa became a reference point, an example of why things had to change. Yet the question nobody could shake was simple and terrifying. How many other children trust adults who don't deserve it? Tanko's final days in court only deepened the haunting atmosphere around his story. Even as he listened to the verdict that sealed his fate, he remained expressionless. No tears, no apologies, no visible sign of understanding the magnitude of what he had done. To many watching, he seemed like a man who had already disconnected from his own humanity. Prison officials later described him as quiet, withdrawn, and strangely calm, a man who never fully acknowledged the horror he had created. Some officers refused to speak to him. Others avoided being alone with him, not because he was dangerous, but because there was something unsettling about his presence. Something empty, something cold. As weeks turned into months, Hanifa's story refused to fade. Her picture, her simple smile, became one of the most recognized faces in Nigeria that year. She became a symbol not just of tragedy, but of innocence violated, of trust abused, of a community united in grief and anger. In homes across Kano, parents told their children to always be careful, even with those they knew. Schools were reminded that safety is not optional. And the memory of Hanifa served as a silent reminder of the darkness that can hide in plain sight. Because the most terrifying part of the story is not the crime itself. It's who committed it. A teacher, a guardian, a man who understood how much she trusted him and used that trust against her. Hanifa's legacy is a painful one, but it is also powerful. Her story forced a community to confront uncomfortable truths. It pushed authorities to strengthen protections. It opened conversations that many had avoided for years. And even though she is gone, her impact remains. In the end, the murder of Hanifa Abubakar will forever stand as a warning that sometimes the greatest danger does not come from strangers, but from those we welcome into our children's lives. Those who are supposed to guide them, protect them, teach them. Monsters do not always hide in the dark. Sometimes They stand at the front of the classroom, smiling. This is True Crime Vault 360, where the past speaks, the truth breathes, and the shadows never stay silent.